Beltran Domecq, President, Cesar Saldaña, Managing Director of the Sherry Council. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
We're joined at home by an audience across the world. We have all kinds of people at home. Some of you will already be into the world of sherry. You will already have that passion. Others will be newcomers, but all of you will have questions, no doubt. So hopefully we can, with you two gentlemen today, answer a lot of those questions. We have a lot of questions to go, but before we get into the questions, I was hoping you could just introduce yourselves and tell us how you came to be in the world of sherry, how you got involved.
Well, in
Beltran?
my case, it's quite clear because I was born in two very important sherry families, and I've been drinking since I have the knowledge that I could walk. So I've been drinking and tasting sherry all my life. And I've been brought up in that way, both Spanish and English, and my university studies have been related always to the enology and the producing of wine. So since the age of whatever, as a student, I was sent in the summers to different wine-producing areas to learn about wine. As I say, I don't want to lengthen this anymore, but it's always been on wine, and specifically sherry and brandy Jerez.
Cesar.
Well, I was born in Jerez too, so and also my family was. My father used to work for an important bodega here in Jerez. My very first job was not in this business; was in a completely different business. But I've been involved in the sherry industry for more than 30 years now. 17 years now in this position at the Consejo. But before, I used to work for two different bodegas. Always in the export business. So yeah, it's part of my life.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so gentlemen, we have a lot of questions to get through today. Let's jump in with the first question. Comes from Adelaide, Australia. Bernard Plant. He asks you, why is Jerez the only area in Spain where you can make sherry wines?
Well, sherry is a denomination of origin. In fact, it was the very first denomination of origin which was created in our country, in Spain, back more than 80 years ago. And that means that there's always a demarcated region where the wines are produced, where the grapes are grown. And this is what makes it, so special. The characteristics of any product protected by a denomination of origins are very closely linked to the region, to the microclimatic conditions, to the soil. So this is basically the reason why sherry can only come from Jerez.
And sherry is the name of our town.
Yeah.
It was a name given to us by the Moorish in the 8th century, which was Xerish, and the English formed it into sherry. It's what this town is called.
Okay. And Diane Gray from the United Kingdom asks, why doesn't flor occur in other wines? Flor being that layer of growth on top of the wine. Beltran?
Flor exists in Jerez and sherry because it is in what the surrounding areas. The grapes contain the yeast, but so is the yeast in the bodegas, in all the areas where sherry is being aged. The possibility of having this flor yeast growing on the surface is natural, and it comes after the fermentation of the wine. This film-forming yeast happens in many places also, but they're not good. In the case of sherry, this yeast, it's a Saccharomyces ellipsoideus, is beneficial for the wine because it protects it from the oxidation and it has a very special metabolism. There might be flor yeast growing in other areas, and the fact is that more northern areas from here, like Montilla, have flor yeast, and sometimes also in wines in Valladolid, yeast was found. Also, we have wines in France that have this yeast growing on the surface. But in the conditions that they have here, the sherry floor yeast in Jerez is unique, and all the aging system it follows preserves this quality, and the Solera system itself provokes that this floor yeast evolves in the same way. So it's autochthon of here, and as I say, it's beneficial. The other part is that there are different film-forming yeast which are negative for wine, which is not a fact in this case. And they are this film which produce bad wines. But this is not the case.
I'd like to add a historical dimension also to the appearance of floor, of this beneficial, as Beltran was saying, type of floor that we have here in Jerez is closely linked also to the fact that we've been fortifying our wines for a long time, for centuries. Basically, at the beginning, as a way of stabilizing wines to help them travel. So most probably, the natural selection process that led to the appearance of our specific type of yeast that form floor is also related to, some mutations in some of the yeast that determine that those mutations provoked by this fortification that we've been doing for so many centuries, that provoke the appearance of these yeast that would learn to live in highly alcoholic environments, and finally resulted in this beneficial flow being formed in the surface of the wine. So this, as Beltran was saying, microclimatic conditions are very important. The colonization by these yeast of the bodegas and also the grapes, but also there's a reason to be found in our history.
That's fascinating. And we have a very interesting question from Jamie Fraser from Portland in the US. He asked you, how did sherry get the old lady reputation?
This is a very curious question, because we were speaking about it, that I've been in this business for a long, long time. So I can remember 40 years ago, we were also worried that sherry was drunk by the old ladies only. And that, it's not true, it can't be true. I mean, 40 years ago, these old ladies are not with us, but we are still drinking more or less in the same pattern, or that's the idea. Sherry is a very modern wine, and because people like, principally in the UK or in the US, they like cream sherries more. Well, it's a question of taste. I mean, people like them. But I wouldn't say that it's the old ladies, but the old ladies love to have a swivel of a drink in the mid-afternoon, which gives them tranquility and nice dreams. But I think that all the young people are coming in and possibly are much more related to the types of fino sherries and manzanillas and possibly dry sherries instead. But anyhow, I think all this thing of speaking about that cream sherries are something which are dark, sticky, and hot. I mean, we have to refreshen the idea. Cream sherries should be drunk cold in a proper glass and adequately, and it's a very good drink. So I recommend, if you're not old, drink it.
Well, I certainly do. Okay, and we have another question from Mariella Bilkers from Holland. She's asking about the styles of sherry in the past. Is it true that Fino was only invented in the mid-19th century? And if this is true, what was the style of sherry before that?
Well, it is true that with the introduction of the Solera system, most probably, and of course there's a lot of hypothetical thinking here. It was the introduction of the Solera system in the 18th century that really resulted in Fino style of sherries or Manzanilla style of sherry as something that would be able to be kept in the long run. I mean, not just as an occasional appearance, but something that could be kept inside the barrels in the bodegas. we've been making wines here for 3,000 years, and of course, the evolution, the differences between the wines that were produced in Roman times, or immediately after the Arabic times, or in the 16th century. I mean, there've been enormous variations, no doubt about that. We do know that before the Solera system in the 17th, 18th century, most of the wines being exported from Jerez were very young wines. There were a number of rules dictated by the guild of, by an institution that was dealing with all these matters here in Jerez. And one of the rules was that aging wines was prohibited, right? So you could not accumulate wines from one year to the next. So most of the wines being exported were very young wines. We know that not only white grapes, but also red grapes were used. Most probably, these wines, precisely because of being young, were very heavily fortified, so high alcoholic content. Probably sweet styles too, by stopping the fermentation by adding wine alcohol, or even naturally fermentation getting to an end. So yeah, that's the idea that we have of the wines before the what we call the modern sherry industry, being modern, end of 18th century, right? High strength wines, some of them sweet, most of them sweet, I would say, and both from white grapes and red grapes.
Yeah.
I would like to mention the fact, anybody interested in literature, he should read Shakespeare's Falstaff, Henry IV, in which Shakespeare gives a perfect explanation what sherry was in the, end of the 16th century, beginning of the 17th century. It's just a curiosity, and I would ask people to read that, because it gives a perfect description of what sherry is, how it affects your organism and your metabolism. I think it's beautiful.
And what does that text say?
Well, I can give you the beginning that I can remember, because I was made to learn by heart when I was 8 years old by my grandfather, who was English. And it says, a good sherry sack has a twofold operation in it. It ascends you into the brain, drives you there all the white and crude vapors which environ it, makes it apprehensive, quick, forgettive, full of nimble, fiery and of delectable shapes, which delivers her to the tongue. It goes on for quite a long piece.
He's a very wise man. I think, Cesar, what you said before kind of answers another question we have. For what reason was the Solera and Criadera system developed and invented?
Well, there were several reasons. One of them, and a very important one, was the abolition of the guild, of this institution, the Vintners Guild, which was really constraining the trade during the 18th century. With the disappearance of the guild, there was a liberalization in the trade. The bodegas started to age the wines, to be able to keep some of the older wines and start to blend them with the new vintages coming. And probably in that way, the winemakers of the time discovered that by running this method of blending the older ones with the younger vintages coming, they were able to supply the market with a consistent quality. Okay. And no doubt that was a tremendous commercial advantage that we really used it and really made sherry a very, very popular wine overseas, particularly in England, but also in some other markets. So most probably it was that objective of providing the market with a consistent quality that created the Solera system. Afterwards, we discovered, or they discovered, the winemakers of the time discovered that because of the Solera system, the identity of the wine was very, very special. For instance, they were able to keep the floor, right, by adding nutrients as the new wines were incorporated into the blend. Also, they found out that it was a beautiful way to help the maturation, oxidation of the wine if the flow was not there. So, in fact, modern styles of sherry were, many of them, born because of the introduction of the Solera system.
Okay.
I'd like to mention also that, as Cesar has said very well, is that not only the Solera system provokes an aging system that is beneficial to the wine and makes it possibly better, because we could do the comparisons of having a vintage wine, sherry, that we don't do, or we do sometimes, in that aging process, statically, compared to the dynamic process of the Solera system, and give them an average aging exactly the same. If you do a tasting of wine, let's say 10 years old, statically, or wine 10 years old, average aging, the Solera system will come out much, much better in the characteristics of the wine.
Okay. And we have one question from New Zealand, Wellington, New Zealand, William Sparrow. He asks, do you think the terroir in sherry will get as important as it once was, with more focus on the vineyards that made the specific wines?
We're absolutely convinced that that is a fact, and it's one of the things that the Consejo Regulador has been working on in the recent years, to give the vineyard owner the knowledge of where he is situated and what pago or what district he belongs to, because the intention is that, because there are some bodegas which are really bottling their wines and putting on their label what the district they come from. And it's very important. I mean, each district has its own microclimatic conditions, its hours of sun per year, liters of rainfall, and winds. I mean, and naturally the type of soil and the deepness, all these factors are very important for the characteristics of the sherry, and we hope that that question is a reality.
Yeah.
The fact is, possibly, it's, I think, more important now than it was before. People haven't given the importance of the soil, of the district, as we are now trying to aim for.
It's interesting because very often we hear that because of the Solera system and the fact that we blend methodically one vintage after the other, you know, it's like if we lose track of the origin, right? But in fact, the Solera system, when linked to a particular vineyard, a particular pago, as we say here, would provide you exactly with the real expression of that pago, of that vineyard, regardless of the changes in weather from one year to the next. So if you consistently supply your Solera from a given pago, always Balbaina or Carrascal or Macharnudo, what you will have at the end of the process of the Solera system is exactly the identity of that pago, 1 year after the next, in the dry years, in the wet years, and in that sense, I think it is the whole industry now is totally convinced, 100% convinced that we had to put more emphasis in the origin because this is where everything comes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And we have a question from Kylie Alexander in the US, Brooklyn. She says, I understand how biologically aged sherry can differ between the cities in the Sherry Triangle, Jerez, Puerto, and San Lucar, thanks to the differences and effects of microclimates on the floor. But are there major differences between oxidative wines? And if so, how?
Well, evidently the microclimates are defending the biological aging, so evidently they will act in the same way for the other wines which are aged non-biologically. But I must say that in the wines which are aged oxidatively, as we speak about, amontillados and olorosos and palo cortados, well, amontillados are previously finos. So they've gone through that biological aging previously in the different places. It could be from Sanlúcar or Jerez or Puerto Santa Maria. Evidently the amontillados that come from manzanillas from Sanlúcar will not be the same to those amontillados coming from Puerto Santa Maria or Jerez. So evidently that's different. And as regards to the oloroso type or palo cortado, evidently these changes of temperatures that we might have, possibly in difference with Sanlúcar, will provoke bigger reactions with the effect of the aging process of the wood and all the different chemical reactions that take place during the aging process, which in some cases with higher temperatures, are reacted more provocative for formation of different components. And that naturally gives a different complexity. It's not the same an Oloroso from Sanlúcar than an Oloroso of Jerez or Puerto Santa Maria, which are more full-bodied.
Okay.
That would be the reason, yeah.
Right. Okay, I think that answers that question. And we have a question coming from Belgium, Ruben Luton. He writes, with the scientific improvements, do you think some of the current sherry regulations could be open to discussion in the near future? For example, the requirement to add alcohol to fortify the wines.
Well, no doubt there will be changes. We've had changes since this denomination of origin was created more than 80 years ago. I mean, and some of these changes have to be with the, new improvements in terms of techniques or research, development, etc. Particularly this issue about being able to have sherries which are non-fortified, implies a number of, there are different issues here. There are legal issues, not only from our regulations, but also from European one legislation that we will need to adapt to. There are technical implications. There are implications in terms of the production. Obviously, if you want to have more sugar in the grapes, you will have to reduce the production that you have out of the out of your vineyards. So yeah, I mean there will be changes, I'm sure. Our role, of course, in all this process is to make sure that these changes will not really interfere in the real identity of sherry. I mean, this is part of our role. I mean, we're the guardians of the orthodoxia, let's put it that way. But things have been changing through the years, and of course, there will be things that will be changed in future versions of our reglamento. We're now working on a new version of our reglamento in which small things will be changed for the benefit of the quality of sherry.
I would like to say also, technically speaking, nobody can be thinking of producing an Oloroso that has less than 17% alcohol. It's not a way of evolving. The same way that you wouldn't have a Fino which would have less than 14.5 alcohol percent, because the evolution of the flow yeast will be different. We will have the invasion of other microorganisms which would change totally the wine. So there are a series of things which are, quite strict, or you have to be strict in the technical point of view to produce the wine you want. Another thing is if we want other types of wines, that could change even more.
Cesar, you mentioned the identity of the wine. I want to ask, what is that essential thing, that essential identity of a sherry wine? Is it the floor or the fortification or the environment?
It's a combination of things. It's a combination. It's what we know today as sherry is the result, as I said before, of many centuries of wine tradition, of having selected the best of our vineyards, the best of our soil, the best possible processes in the bodega, and it's the sum of many different factors. I wouldn't say that sherry is solely the only result of floor or Solera system or chalky soil or Palomino grape. It is a combination of things that has resulted in a very strong identity, because this is something that we're very proud of. I mean, we do not imitate any other wine region of the world.
That's true.
That's why sherry is what it is. I mean, it's the town of Jerez, and implication and historic aspects, as Cesar mentions, which is important.
Okay, and I've got a question from Karel de Graaf from France. He writes, some almacenistas have started to sell their old wines, or had started to sell their old wines because of a decrease in sales. So the almacenistas have old stocks and are suppliers of high quality wines. Do you think that there will be a risk in the future that the quality of the wines of the bodegas will decrease?
I would say totally no. I mean, evidently there are small bodegas which are appearing as almacenistas and have good wines, but I must say that the big bodegas have magnificent wines and have had them, and they are well balanced in their stocks to give the qualities that are given commercially speaking. Yes, I mean, almacenistas reduced in a certain moment, but have increased now, which is a good thing. I think it gives us more varieties of types of wines, but evidently the high quality wines are in the different bodegas, of big bodegas, small bodegas, or medium bodegas. I mean, the old wines will not be affected.
Yeah, I think there is always that tendency to think small is beautiful, right? And sometimes it's true, right? But I have to say that here in Jerez, having a certain size is very good for winemakers, because they can select out of the different stocks what is best for the different lines that they're working in, right? So yeah, I mean, it is the fact that almacenistas have started to sell under their own brands is a process that we've always had here. I mean, you never start as a big company, right? Wherever you start in a business, you start from a small scale and then you grow. And in that growing process, there's one point at which any almacenista will probably be willing to see their own wines in the market. So this is when they jump into the shippers category, right? Regardless of the fact that they may do the two things. I mean, some of the almacenistas, they're selling some of their aged wines to the big bodegas, and they have a small part of their production that they sell under the brands, right? So that's a very natural process, and we've had that in Jerez, I would say, always. But more importantly, I think we need to we need to make the statement clear that in Jerez, not necessarily small is beautiful. I mean, you can be beautiful regardless of being small, medium-sized, or big.
Okay. And we have a question from Dan Andrews, Vancouver, Canada. He asks, most sherry wines proudly refer to the old age of their Solerans. Obviously, it takes a long time to create a new sherry wine. Are many bodegas currently working on new wines, or are most working with what they already have?
Well, I would say that all bodegas have a great variety of sherries, because naturally they start with vintage wines, finos and olorosos. They go through solera systems of different aging processes and so on. So the different types exist there. Evidently, there are wines that have to be discovered. I mean, there are derivations of different products. Like, for example, more recently we are having more aged finos or manzanilla pasadas, or we're having vinos en rama, wines with minimum treatments. These are variations within what there is, what exists. Evidently, in the old times, possibly different blends were done for different people. But more or less, that is more stabilized. The medium type sherries might be medium sweet, medium dry, or the cream sherries, and so on. So I feel that the possibilities are there to increase new products or new types, but they are there stably in the different bodegas. I don't know if this has more.
Well, one interesting thing that we see now is growers becoming winemakers, right? That would be new additions to the sherry scene, right? But when we talk about already established bodegas, basically what they do is as Beltran was saying, they will put in the market specific styles that they had in their soleras that probably they would be part of the of bigger sacas, and now they go more specific for instance, instead of just having a brand that is imagine a manzanilla that is a bottle under the same label every time that they do a saca. Now they will differentiate every saca and they will market every saca differently, because this one was taken out in springtime, this other one in autumn. So there are small differentiations that these producers they want to show to the market. So yeah, in general, most of the novelties that we see in the market, these are realities that already existed in the bodegas. But I would mention also the fact that some growers are becoming winemakers, and in that sense, obviously they're starting from scratch. It takes a long time to produce a good sherry, right? It takes a good time to a long time to establish a solid solera. So depending on the style of wine we're talking about, for a grower or a newcomer into the business to really be able to put in the market a solid, nicely aged manzanilla, or even more difficult, a solid oloroso, will take a long time, but you can start from scratch.
Yeah.
Then additionally, you see the question is that some producer can have a fino and sells fino. Suddenly, some years go by and he doesn't sell all that amount of fino, and those soleras of fino become amontillados. So that is giving him the opportunity, unfortunately, to sell amontillados, which are very delicious too. That's the situation.
And the next question, we've actually received the same question more or less from many different people. There seems to be a real desire from the people who have discovered sherry that it does well, and that more people discover it, and that it returns to its former glory. So Robbie Robinson from Orange, Australia, he asks, what ongoing marketing strategies are being planned to promote sherry to the world to increase their global sales? Basically, how do we make sherry sexy?
Well, the main thing is to do a lot of questions and answer sessions like this one. No, I mean, I'm joking. But one strategy that we've been implementing for the last few years is about creating a community of sherry lovers. I mean, our message is not a simple message. I mean, it's not something that we can just, buy lots of billboards and that's it. It's not about that. Sherry is much more than that. It's more, I don't want to use the word complicated, but there's a story behind every bottle of sherry that needs to be passed on. And so we believe a lot in education. We believe a lot in experiencing in tasting and in trying sherry with different foods and different places from different cultures, and passing the whole message, right? Not just drink sherry, that's it. And that complicated message, that requires some time, it's better communicated, one by one, right? Yeah. So through education, through very hands-on promotions, by bringing the winemakers to the markets, by doing all these kind of things that we've been doing the last few years, I'm happy to say that we have the sense that we have created an enormous community of sherry lovers that in turn are passing our message on, right? So this is a chain effect. This is the only possible strategy, because it's, first, we don't have a lot of money to invest, right? Most of the houses, they spend a lot of money in making the best possible sherry. they don't make big margins, so there are no big budgets, unfortunately, for sherry nowadays. So we have to be very conscious on how do we spend these budgets. And besides, as I said before, this message needs a one-on-one communication strategy. So this is what we're doing. So far, it seems like it's proven to be a positive strategy because that community keeps on growing every year. And I don't know, it might be the product itself, but it's a product that once you get into it, I mean, you never stop exploring and finding new styles and new combinations, new food pairings, new ways of enjoying it, and you always love to tell your friends about it, right? So this is what we do. This is the way we are convinced we will make sherry again a very, very popular wine among wine lovers.
I'd like to comment something about the sexy part, because it's a good question. And I think drinking sherry will make things more sexy. I mean, there's nothing better than drinking sherry to communicate between people, and that brings attraction.
Yeah.
So please drink sherry if you want sexy attractions.
Okay. Just a follow-up question I want to ask, how did sherry kind of lose that market that it once had?
Yeah. How did sherry lose the market?
Lose that sexiness.
Possibly it's the old ladies that were drinking it all now. So we have to make the young people drink it.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the line has been covered, and I think basically the young people should be starting to drink this. And there's a new line which has been worked a lot in the US and the UK, and that is the cocktail side. I think it's very attractive. Sherry, especially Fino Zamatania, go very well with lemony drinks, and they do a very good refreshing cocktail, the same as cream sherries do very well with orangey types of drinks, and they, again, on the rocks, produce really delicious things. So sherries with versatility do a fantastic mixture and cocktails that I think enhance the product and enhance the young people to drink it.
Okay. And we have a very, very difficult question here from Melanie Gardiner in the United Kingdom. She asks, how many barrels are there in the Jerez Triangle? And if you can't answer that, what's the area in square meters of the Sherry Triangle?
No, I mean, we keep track of the barrels
Really?
in every single bodega. It's a pity that I didn't know this. I had this question before because I would have given you an exact number, right? But it's about 300,000 barrels that we have in stock. I mean, the different bodegas have aged the wines. And about the surface, I don't know if the question refers to the vineyard, the hectares of vineyard. We have at this point in time about 7,000 hectares of vineyard. We have some more in the area, but registered as vineyards with the right to produce grapes for sherry, it's about 7,000 hectares.
Okay.
It's not that difficult.
Very exact. Maybe we can get that exact number of barrels for Melanie.
I'll find it
We'll put it on the Facebook afterwards. And we have one other question from Samuel Ireland from the UK. What do you do with the sherry used to season all the whiskey barrels?
Well, I mean, as you know, we have an important fact that we do here is that all the whiskey uses sherry barrels to age. How is this done? Well, it has to be done with sherry, real sherry, and it has to be certified sherry. That process is a process which is more or less long in time, and that will mean that that sherry will be used or reused for seasoning other barrels and can be used later on for blending, for different types of sherries or whatever. And depending on the quality, each bodega will have his specialist or enologist to decide if this sherry can be used in the sherry purpose production. In the end, it could be, or it could be distilled, or it could be transformed into other products, or vinegar, or whatever. Sherry vinegar.
Yeah, one of the things that we do in the Consejo, and this is relatively new, is that we also certify the time that the barrels have contained the sherry, right? So that people who buy those barrels can be sure about the fact that they have contained sherry, real sherry, and also about the time that this seasoning has been taking place. But as Beltran was saying, at the end of the day, it's the decision of the bodega winemaker. I mean, every time that new barrels are produced, you know that we cannot use them as such, because a new barrel would totally ruin the wine. So what we do is that typically the prensas, which is the last fraction of the musts that we obtain at the beginning of the process, we use new barrels to ferment those rough musts, which are not going to be used for making sherry. In that way, the barrels start to be seasoned. Then we can use these barrels in sobre tabla, maybe. And as Beltran was saying, I mean, the wine that is used for seasoning these barrels may be reutilized by the same wine for different barrels, right? At the end of the process, well, it's up to the winemaker. Normally, if it's been reutilized many times, these wines will be dequalified and distilled for the obtention of alcohol. They might be used for making sherry vinegar, or they might be incorporated to blends, or it depends. It depends, because there are many levels of cask seasoning, and it is at the end of the day the decision of the winemaker.
Okay. And we have a question from Philip McGurdy in the UK. He wants to know about the Palo Cortado. He says, can you explain what exactly is the Palo Cortado and how is it different to an Amontillado?
Well, the Palo Cortado is the great mystery in wines, and we like it to be thought like that. It's a very special and a rare type of sherry. It appears in certain moments in the classification or second classifications of what young phenos can be, or vintage phenos can be, and they are redirected in a different way. So initially, if they were decided to be phenos, they will be a year or a year and a half later refortified to say 17% alcohol. So consequently, they go into what would be the line of the olorosos. Basically, the difference between a Palo Cortado and Amontillado is that the Amontillado is a wine which is produced initially as a fino, so it goes through the Solera system of fino and this biological aging, and then ages additionally without the flow yeast, consequently with this evolution of color, aroma, and so on. Palo Cortado hasn't had this biological aging, or has had it in a very small proportion, so that is a big difference. Amontillado is a very delicate type of wine, and Palo Cortado is a very delicate type of oloroso. So it's, by the denomination of origin, we define it as an oloroso with the aroma of an Amontillado. So it's a kind of intermediate thing, but as a mystery, total mystery.
There's one factor that will probably help a lot of people to differentiate between the Palo Cortado and the Amontillado, because they all have the same origin as first young wines. I mean, wines that had been obtained through very light pressing, that have been initially fortified to 15%, that have been part of the sobre tabla fino. But the big difference, as Beltran was saying, is that Amontillados will follow the fino or manzanilla route for years, whereas the Palo Cortado will be very soon refortified. And there's one important element that will mark a huge difference between these two, or two elements that will create a big difference. One is the effect of floor, which is very important in the Amontillado, very, very important, very present, right?
Yeah.
The pungency should be there. But the other element is glycerin, which is one of the basic components in young wines, a component that, because of the action of flow, will be reduced dramatically in the case of Amontillados. But in the case of the Palo Cortado, because of having had very little floor time, the glycerin content will not only diminish, but will slightly increase with the concentration effect of oxidative aging, right? So at the end of the day, it is that smoothness of Palo Cortado, that glyceric mouth of the Palo Cortado, which will be a very, very big difference versus the very sharp, dry finish of Amontillado, right? Okay. So it's another clue. But I saw the other day, the guys from Lustau invited me to a tasting in the US, and they presented me with a beautiful T-shirt with, well, it was a black T-shirt, but anyway, the message was beautiful. It is magic, even if you know how it's done, right? So yeah, I mean, we can explain the process, but still, it's magic.
Yeah. That I've got a question in mind. I was in a bodega a while ago, and someone asked the guy in the bodega, the capataz, the cellar master. They said, after working with wine for so long, a lifetime with wine, do you lose some of that? Does it lose some of that mystery or that?
I think it increases. I mean, the more knowledge. What did Aristotle say? I know so much that I don't know anything. No? But that's what happened.
Yeah.
I think one gets to a point which you're increasing your knowledge continuously and finding out things that you couldn't believe in the old times. I think it's a fact with age.
I think that the beauty of wines in general, but very specifically the beauty of sherry, is that, I mean, you can have a lifetime experience and having tasted many sherries, but it's very common that suddenly you open a bottle, you take a glass, you smell it and say, wow, it's still, you find lots of surprises. I mean, there are so many nuances, so many aspects of sherry that really, even if you've been 34 years around, it really shocks you up.
Yeah. And we have one more question. Brian Jones from the UK asks, he writes, I have a question for Beltran Domecq. If you were a sherry, Beltran, which would you be and why?
It's a difficult situation. But I would say that when I was a young man, I was a vintage Fino. Then I passed through the Solera systems of the Finos. I became a teenager, and then I was turning from Fino to Amontillado, losing the floor yeast. I would be evolving as an Amontillado. Then possibly, as more age, I would become Palo Cortado, which is a good stage as a Palo Cortado. And now what I am is a VRS, a very old rare sherry. I'm certified over 40 years, and I'm a Palo Cortado, yes.
And you, Cesar?
Well, I don't know. Maybe because Amontillado is the most, I would say, is the favorite sherry style for Jerezanos. I mean, very often when we meet and when we let's have a sherry. Very often we drink Amontillado. Well, probably because of that nice idea of having this first stage, as Beltran was beautifully describing, and then the other maturation process more in Well, we all like to describe ourselves as Amontillados.
Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much for those insights, for that knowledge. We'll wrap it up there, but before we do wrap it up, we'll just tell the audience that if you have any other questions, you can just write to us on our Facebook page under the live Q&A section, and you can ask Beltran and Cesar any other questions, and they will get back to you straight away. And also, Sherry Week, it goes on. There's, I think, 2,000 events all across the globe. So if you have an event in your city or your town, go to it, participate, meet people, and sharing that sherry knowledge and get that love of sherry like these gentlemen have. It's a really rich world to explore. So hopefully Sherry Week can do that for you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.